It's a cliche that you move to the right or you become more corrupt when you go into politics. And he's an example of someone for whom the opposite is the case.
In the annals of time, riding social forces as they crest and crash under the shores of history, some would-be heroes stumble but manage to recover their breath. Others are reduced to the flotsam and jetsam of nostalgia. These others are our subjects. They are the vanquished, 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 vanquished.
And we have a special episode today. We try to cover failed presidential candidates who are in the news usually or relevant to today for whatever reason. And we have a guy who passed on a week or two ago who neither of us had heard of, but I was seeing people sharing stuff about him on Twitter. And it's special because he's like a little known guy, but also because he shares a name with one of us. And this is the first time we have covered a Fred.
Yeah, this is Fred Harris. By far my favorite Fred who's run for president. I've been recently watching Fred Thompson videos. That's the kind of nerd I am. And he is very mean. This guy is amazing. Fred Harris, he never had a podcast about him. During his entire lifetime. This is the first ever Fred Harris podcast. He was the Bernie Sanders of 1976. And this guy, stick with us because this guy has like a likability that's just amazing. And you'll be glad that you found out who he was. I assumed Andrews already knew. I only found out about him when he died. But yeah, big fan.
Yeah, I'm sure I had seen the name somewhere. He is referenced in We Got People, the Ryan Grimm book, which I looked up that passage again. And he is, obviously anybody can run for president. There's a lot of people who are irrelevant, but this guy actually does have a lot to sort of teach us about American history in the 20th century. He's probably the best guy we've tackled so far.
Yeah, he has a certain purity. Henry Wallace has negative things about him. This guy is mostly just nice. Also, it does help this guy had like a shorter political career.
Yeah.
So he gets vanquished and then he's like, okay, I'm going to do other things in my life. I'll stick to activism. So he hadn't really been active in politics since 1976. And he lived until just this last month.
It's a cliche that you move to the right or you become more corrupt when you go into politics. And he's an example of someone for whom the opposite is the case. In Britain, there's Tony Benn, and that's really the only other example that comes to the top of my head of someone who moves left because of their experience in government. They see how things really work, and they decide this can be done better. They don't just acquiesce to the system. And in both cases, I think that may have been fatal in terms of their careers. But he's still, a really interesting guy who I'm excited to share knowledge about. And I want more people to know about Mr. Harris. So what I was thinking of, his name is Fred, may or may not have been Frederick. He was born in 1930. Probably hard to get that birth certificate, but there is a controversy, not about his first name so much as his middle name. His parents had a disagreement over whether it should be Ray or Roy. Oklahoma, 1930, birth certificates were written by hand, and it was kind of ambiguous which name he got for his middle name. The A looked like an O or the O looked like an A, and that was probably their compromise, is like, we'll make it so you can't tell if it's an O or an A. I'm trying to imagine what that letter looks like. I guess an O with like a really tiny A tail.
Thinking it's script and you can't tell. I don't know if we have a picture of it. I'd love to see a picture, or it'd be fun if we could buy it at an auction or something. But yeah, I think the connecting thing between the O and the Y, maybe that's the A tail, or maybe that's just the O connecting.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it was ambiguous, so he basically got to choose and sided with his mom. I guess he was a mama's boy, and he went by Fred Roy Harris, which, I guess the middle name is not super consequential in one's life, but that is a neat little story. As you said, it's from Oklahoma, Cotton County, which is near Walters, Oklahoma. His mother was Eunice, and his father was another Fred Byron Harris, who was a sharecropper. And in a recent interview, said he was born in a two-room house during the Dust Bowl. His dad had a third-grade education, similar to his mom. And we read a little bit of a book of his, Can People Do It, where he talks about growing up during this era, and they moved a lot around the same town, but they would move from place to place. He would live with different races. He had no indoor plumbing until he was 12 years old. All in all, there were 19 different houses he lived in. His mom worked as a carpenter, which meant that the house was well maintained at least. And then the landlord would often raise their rent, and then they'd have to keep moving. And I think that early experience growing up in Oklahoma at this time, which is not too long after the Green Corn Rebellion, where you had indigenous Oklahomans, black people, and poor whites teaming up together to fight the draft because World War I was happening. That I had an effect on people in Oklahoma, and that's, I think, the reason. I mean, that explains some of Fred's mentality towards these things. Is that that sort of left-wing strain that was very prominent in Oklahoma in the early 20th century, and has been kind of beaten out of the state, unfortunately, in a lot of ways.
There's a lot of but he's like a very much a self-made man type of guy, and a lot of them who grew up poor, they then have a resentment towards poor people, or they embrace racism, and he doesn't. And it's amazing just that he comes from a county named Cotton, which sounds like the most racist possible name for a county that you could get away with. But he never seemed to have been racist, and then he gets even more anti-racist during his experiences.
Mm-hmm. And he marries a Comanche woman who is a social activist from Oklahoma. He does call her exotic, which some people might squirm at, but he's an old guy. And he has a funny story about her dad, that his dad thought people on TV could see you as you watch the TV, which is awkward when eventually Fred makes it to TV as a politician. Apparently Fred didn't know how to explain that phenomenon to his father-in-law.
Yeah, he was supposed to lie about it just to kind of humor the guy, but he doesn't. And then his father-in-law's like, that guy doesn't know anything about TV. And it does make sense. Yeah, TV was really weird. I mean, this guy, his father-in-law was probably born, around the turn of the century, if not before. And it's insane the way people can just talk into our houses. And it's people how to get used to it.
Yeah. That reminds me of Bamboozled. Have you seen that movie, Spike Lee?
I haven't.
There's a story from the movie about how the main character, and it's a fictional movie, but watching it made me think this had to have happened because, moon landing was in 1968 or thereabouts. It was on TV, and there are people who were old at that point in the late 60s, had been born in the 1800s, many of them. So the main character in the story, or in the movie, tells a story about how his grandma just refused to believe that a moon landing was happening. And was like, I don't care what that idiot box says. There's no man walking on the moon. That doesn't happen.
That's the generation. They went from horse and carriage to man on the moon. There's even a Mad Men quote. There's a woman who dies. I think it's before the man lands on the moon.
Right.
But it's she grew up she was born in a barn, and she ended up on the 20th story of some amazing building. She was an astronaut.
Yep. Bert Cooper. And another quick tale from his childhood that I found really interesting is one of his earliest memories is laying in the grass and looking up at clouds. And in the clouds, he sees not just shapes of things, but he sees the things that he recognizes from day-to-day life. Like he sees dogs in trees, in wheels, or just things that are on Earth. And he said that as he grew older, it became a little vaguer, and that he says that that's actually a thing in science, in childhood development, that when you're like a baby or like up to age 3, you see things in clouds, like, and the shapes are the same shapes that you see on Earth, which is I found really interesting. But yeah, his first wife, LaDonna, she does go on later, and this is after Fred has retired from politics. She is a vice presidential candidate for a third party, the Citizens Party, in 1980. She runs with Barry Commoner. And they do get divorced a year later, but they were married during that period. So kudos to him for being a supportive husband, and even, having a wife who is stepping out on the Democratic Party. Because to his dying day, for better or worse, Fred Harris was a Democrat. He never really left the party.
There's a lot of feminist about him. His mom was a carpenter. That's cool. LaDonna's doing a lot of things. His next wife ends up, I think, running the New Mexico Democratic Party for some time. I'm not sure if she still even does. But yeah, he's also pretty, especially for someone born in 1930, he's pretty damn feminist. And that's another awesome thing about this guy.
Yeah. He went to the University of Oklahoma, got a scholarship, graduated in 1952, and then goes to law school, which he loves, apparently. He's just really, really psyched about becoming a lawyer.
His friend talked him into it. His friend was like, we should both go to law school. And he's like, my friend hated it. I loved it. He loved the first year of law school, which is notably torture, a lot of reading. And he was just like, this is my thing. He is a delightful nerd. Mr. Fred Harris.
Talks a little bit about, in the memoir, McCarthyism. The local Democrats are being red-baited and denounced by local newspapers. And he works on Roy Turner's gubernatorial campaign, 1954, in Oklahoma, running for re-election. And he doesn't win, but Fred Harris is in charge of youth turnout. And this turns out to be a formative experience for him politically. And so he gets kind of in with the Oklahoma Democratic Party and runs for state senate. The incumbent in that seat has a brain tumor and is the youngest member of the state senate during his entire tenure. So it's just the whole time he's there, he's the baby. He's anti-race discrimination in state employment. He does try to run for governor in 1962 and fails, but this kind of boosts his name recognition throughout Oklahoma. So he's a hotshot in the 50s and 60s. This is an up-and-coming Democratic guy, and, the way I interpret it is Oklahoma is kind of, their Democratic Party is kind of the little brother to the Texas Democratic Party. At least that's the way I looked at it, and especially his relationship with LBJ. Maybe people from there would dispute that characterization, but this is, LBJ is bringing electricity to Texas a few years earlier, and this is when you have the New Deal is like a very live thing still. Eisenhower has kind of made peace with it, and you have government investment in rural areas in Texas and Oklahoma. So it's just a totally different political dynamic from today, but you still have discrimination and all kinds of problems. But to be a moderate Democrat at that point means you're for like big programs in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it's great. He embraces the New Deal. He embraces LBJ, eventually the Great Society, and he doesn't have to embrace the racism. Because Oklahoma must have been segregated until around this time, at least.
Yeah. So he's thinking of running for governor again when there's a special election in 1964. There's a senator who dies, and he is able to win the Democratic primary for that Senate seat by pitching himself as the most electable candidate. And he gets those other candidates to support him, and then runs against the guy he had just lost to as governor for Oklahoma. And this guy's a football coach, right?
Oh, yeah. So this is in the primary. Then he gets the general election. Okay. Now, I know you guys probably listening are not college football fans, but people in Oklahoma are. And this coach won 47 college football games in a row. It's still the record as far as I know. This guy didn't lose, okay? He's the college football coach. He won 47 games in a row. This is not an easy guy to beat from some dorky state senator from Oklahoma. And he is able to beat Bud Wilkerson after Bud Wilkerson won the 47 straight games. It is just amazing.
Okay. So Bud Wilkerson is a Democrat.
Oh, Wilkerson is this is the general. He beats the governor. So he has to beat a bunch of people. He has to win the primary in the special election. It's a little confusing. I know what you're saying, because like, why is there a primary if it's a special election? But he makes it seem like there's a primary.
Okay. So,
and there was someone got a point. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we say it. So Wilkerson's the Republican. It's very much, about Tom Osborne and like how he was a congressman?
The
Nebraska guy. Basically, a lot of times college football coaches, you can then become you can then get elected.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So Tom Osborne, the team in the 90s, you're too young to remember, they were amazing. And then he became a congressman for a while just because you love me, I'm a football coach.
Tommy Tuberville from Alabama, right?
Oh, yeah, that's another. Yeah. So basically, he beats the modern day Tommy Tuberville attempt. But this guy, it's not just a beloved football coach. They won 47 straight games. So they won like a bunch of championships in a row. They didn't lose for seasons. And then you're running against this guy, and you're just, like I said, a dorky guy, and you're able to beat this guy in the general. That's an amazing feat, especially that you're not willing to go to racism, which I'm sure was a big winner back in those days.
Wow. Okay. So he defeats a sitting governor in the primary and then goes on to defeat a hugely popular football coach for the Sooners in the general election.
Yes.
That's very impressive. This guy is a hotshot. I don't know what makes him so capable in Oklahoma at this time, but he's got some kind of juice. I guess, maybe he reminds people of Kennedy in some way. Who, I don't know how popular he was in Oklahoma, but he, is really able to command a presence, and he's a good speaker. And he's part of this Johnson sort of politics where they're saying if you should elect Fred if you want to help me.
And there is a thing of Oklahoma being a Democrat. I think the fact that Oklahoma tended to vote Democrat did help, but you would still think the football coach could reverse it. Right.
Johnson is asked if he's going to support Fred Harris, and he has a funny quote. Shit, I'm trying to find it. Where is it?
It's on the net. Yeah, it's on the next page of the outline, I think.
Oh, it's right here. Great, thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah, LBJ endorses him, and he says he shakes Fred's hand, and he says, "I need Fred Harris in Washington. Send me Fred Harris, and together we'll charge hell with a bucket of water. We'll tack the coonskin on the barn door, and old Fred will bring home the bacon." So very folksy endorsement from the president, who's being reelected or elected, really, by a landslide. And he also gets endorsed by Hubert Humphrey and Strom Thurmond, I guess. Is this Strom Thurmond?
Thurmond goes the other way. Thurmond endorses Wilkerson. Okay. And Thurmond's not that popular. I mean, I guess at this point he's a Republican, but he might still be associated with the Democrats. And Thurmond is very jingoistic and kind of riling things up in Vietnam. And if you remember the 1964 election, there's a big thing of Johnson being the guy who doesn't want to rile up Vietnam because people don't really want to think about starting a big war in Vietnam. They don't want to think about Vietnam at all. And Barry Goldwater is kind of the more hawkish on Vietnam candidate. And then Thurmond is kind of helping make Bud Wilkerson seem that way. And that hurts him.
Yeah. So this is a special election. So he's not going to serve a full 6 years full term. But he does win 51% to 49%. He's 33 at the time, and the youngest senator elect in Oklahoma's history. And because it's a special election, he starts his job in 1964, November 4th, 1964, gets sworn in, and is very supportive of the Great Society. He also votes for the Voting Rights Act, which is a not uncontroversial thing at the time. He does miss a vote confirming Thurgood Marshall, as well as the 68 Civil Rights Act, but he was sick for that one. But he said he supports both of these votes. And by 1968, he's up for re-election because, again, it's just special. And he tries to maintain his liberal views at the time. He's moving a little bit more left, but he's, still kind of a Johnson type. But Oklahoma is starting to get a little more conservative. He is reelected, though. 1966 is when he's reelected, not 1968. And he is reelected by a larger margin than he came in with. He gets 54 to 46%. He's running against a lawyer, Pat J. Patterson. Little alliteration there. I don't know if that hurt him. But Patterson had tried to support this constitutional amendment that would have allowed school boards to allow school prayer, essentially. And Oklahomans really support it, but Harris still wins them over with a public letter where he says, "I believe in the separation of church and state, and I believe prayer and Bible reading should be voluntary." So even in 1966, school prayer, you could still kind of convince people in a place like Oklahoma that that shouldn't be, that we should keep church and state separate.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I really like how he did that. And I went to a religious school, K-8, so I grew up with school prayer, and it is so damn boring. It is a nightmare. So just on that aspect, just please, don't make the kids pray, because it is painful.
Yeah. So as you said, he was a loyalist with Johnson for the beginning of his term, and then he's reelected. And in 67, he starts to have some questions, and he changes his mind and becomes more anti-war. And he learns through the Senate that we're not really winning the war in Vietnam, so to speak. And around this time, too, he is selected to serve on the Kerner Commission, which proves to be a really, really important and influential experience in the life of Fred Harris.
Absolutely, and it's what he's best known for. Yeah, it's a commission on the riots and the cause of them, and they don't say racist stuff. They actually go the other way. They say it's because of the racism in our society. It's actually the first government report to use the word racism, and I had never heard of this thing. And it's amazing that the government said this back in '68. And I wish it would have been heeded, because we're still not. Most people have not learned the lessons from this commission still to this day. But it's spelled out pretty clearly from this commission.
Right. And he's kind of surprised that he gets picked. His daughter answers the phone, and it's President Johnson. And he says, "This is President Johnson. Let me talk to your daddy." And LBJ at one point, because LBJ does not love the Kerner Commission, to be clear. He's, he's pretty proud of himself for the Great Society programs, and he wants to kind of push the narrative that they've done the job and we're healing, and racism isn't over. But he's basically put it on its last legs. But it shows different things from that, and shows that the Great Society programs, as good as they might be compared to like what we have today, still were fairly insufficient, and the money that was going to Vietnam needed to go into inner cities and poor areas. But there's a quote from LBJ that Fred Harris now is comfortable sharing, where LBJ says to him, "Remember, you're a Johnson man. If you forget it, I'll take out my pocket knife and," trigger warning, little vulgar here, "I'll cut your dick off," is what the President of the United States said to Senator Fred Harris.
They don't make him like this anymore. I also he's like, "Remember, you're a Johnson man, because if you don't go with it, I'll make you a Johnson less man." Yeah, I wish I could tell him to say that. Yeah, he was. Yeah. LBJ is both the best and the worst president we've ever had. Yeah, he's just capable of such horrible penis mutilation talk, and also did the most left-leaning things on civil rights and on like stuff like Medicare.
Yeah, he's an odd duck. Also has a weird fixation on genitalia, including his own.
Absolutely. It's weird. It's very weird. It's like he has a penis and he has penis envy, and he's just, he's crazy.
Yeah. But this experience is radicalizing, and it is widely accepted that, he's up for re-election in 1972, but at this point he's like, Oklahoma's changing and I'm kind of changing too. And that's, most people think, why he didn't run in 1972, because he just didn't think he was going to win again, because people were reacting against the riots in a lot of these cities, and to have like a nuanced response to them was not what a lot of white America wanted to hear.
I agree. But the commission says a lot of really good stuff, but it's sold to white people as your taxes are going to go up and this is all your fault. And it's sold to them as like, we're just going to do big government. And instead they're going to get conned into Reaganism instead. But it's really not about that. It's really about something a lot better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it attributes the riots to decades of pervasive discrimination and segregation, and says white racism is essentially responsible for the explosive mixture which has been accumulating in our cities since the end of World War II. What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Black can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it. White institutions maintain it. White society condones it. The best-known passage warns that the nation is moving toward two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal. And yeah, as you might imagine, a lot of conservatives were not happy about this report. There's a rebuttal from that conservatives put out, and there's a congressman who says these recommendations of the president's panel can be summed up in 3 words: spend more money.
And Harris even says that's how his dad hears it. His dad hears it as like, oh yeah, they want to tax me even more. I'm already taxed too much. And he does point out like that it was also to help poor white people as well. The commission wasn't about only helping poor Black people. It was about helping all the poor people. I do like the Two Americas thing is kind of cool. John Edwards kind of co-ops this when he's back running in 2004. I know Edwards, a member of the Vanquished, we're excited to do at some point. Yeah. And I would just say if people want to understand a little better, the book that made me understand these concepts, even before I heard of the Kerner Commission, was, and it's a pretty nerdy book, but if you've listened this far, you're probably pretty nerdy. The Color of Law goes into all the rules in the North that basically through laws made things unequal in housing and jobs and stuff, and in many other ways, probably education in the North. So if you read that book, that helps you understand and really get the ideas of what was going on in the North up until this time.
Yeah. In the experience of being on the Kerner Commission, Fred Harris has to interact with people like John Lindsay, who's the mayor of New York, and they become kind of friendly, which LBJ does not like, and he also doesn't like John Lindsay taking credit for his programs that the federal government is footing the bill for. And there's a member of Congress who says to Johnson that this report's going to ruin you. It's going to encourage riots and not say anything good about what you did. Johnson cancels a meeting with the commission, and he doesn't give them the 6 months they wanted to lobby for their recommendations.
A funny thing is, so it's funny. The guy could have said to LBJ's like, this report is going to be your Vietnam, because right after he finds out Vietnam actually ruins him. Yeah. So the thing was that it's LBJ's commission. They're going to meet with LBJ afterwards. They're going to explain it to him. They're going to ask for a little more time to implement stuff. And instead the report gets leaked and it's all coming out. And basically people are able to kind of propagandize and tell LBJ that doesn't give him credit for stuff and that it's a criticism of him before he's even seen the report. And the report just basically doesn't get a fair hearing. And he can't, like as you said, he cancels the meeting. They don't get their 6 more months. And the media has to report on the report without having time to read it. And they portray it in a way that's not flattering.
Yeah. There is an impact that it has, though. There's a poll taken about a month before the Kerner Commission and says only 37% of American whites think the riots were mainly caused by racism. And the next poll that's taken after the Newark and Detroit riots, that number's now down to 16%. Or excuse me,
I think you got that backwards.
Yeah. I'll take that again. Sorry. After the report comes out, 37% of whites think that the riots were mainly caused by racism, kind of reacting to this report. And then there are more riots, and people start to think, yeah, maybe there's something to this, and that the number goes down to 16%. So there are, some things that it arguably does, and it also, some of the recommendations were things that Johnson had done, and they said this needs to be like followed through on. And as Harris points out, there is progress that's made after the Kerner Commission for about 10 years. And then Reagan comes in and, everything goes backwards. But he does have some regrets about the way the commission was conducted. They hadn't included journalists in visiting these neighborhoods, and he says they didn't do enough to loop in LBJ, and they get the journalists kind of get ahead of them because it's leaked to the Washington Post. So reporters have to summarize what the commission says. They say basically white racism is the cause of Black Riot, commission says, is the headline. And so they don't really have time to frame it for the American people. So that's a regret he has, that it was leaked. And that, he wanted to really convey too, that it's, as you said, about the poverty of all Americans and not just Black Americans, and also couldn't convince LBJ that the riots weren't a conspiracy.
LBJ takes this stuff very, very personally. Yeah, LBJ was like, I gave him the right to vote, and then there were riots kind of started right afterwards. The Watts riots were the most immediate ones, but then this commission is a little bit about other riots. And LBJ's like, I gave him the right to vote. Why are they rioting? It must be outside agitators. And LBJ can go to a very paranoid place. And he just cannot be convinced that it's not, that it's not specific people, like maybe like a person like Fred Hampton type person, kind of agitating people. And I think there's even a statement like, oh, no, it's not them. There's thousands of people like him in these neighborhoods who really just feel this way. And they feel like they've been taken advantage of. I did want to go back to the MLK quote. MLK has a good quote about the commission. It comes out a little before he dies. He says, it's like a physician's warning of approaching death with a prescription for life, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah. There's a book, Locked in the Poorhouse, that reports on 30 years after the Kerner report. There's more poverty in America, and this is Fred Harris He says it's deeper, blacker, and browner than before, and more concentrated in cities, which have become America's poorhouses. And yeah, one of the sociologists says that the commission should have given more everyday examples of discrimination, and without them, it enabled whites to believe that the commission was wrong or not talking about something that was relevant. But there were some things, as we said, that have been addressed. The Fair Housing Act came about a month after the report was completed, and then funding came in for urban aid programs, urban renewal, federal aid for education, Community Development Act. So, there's this kind of weird dynamic where people are dismissing the report and saying, well, this is bogus, but at the same time they're like, okay, I guess we should do some of these things, and they do make an impact, as we said. And by the time Nixon's in office, all this money's coming in, and he can't really do much to stop it because it's a totally different political world at that time.
At some point, Nixon. Oh, sorry, we put this in the other episode, but he puts Rumsfeld and Cheney. Those literally the two of them. They're in charge of one of the programs, trying to sabotage. So Nixon is trying, but he's not quite able to do that. One flaw in the commission that I did see is it talks a lot about community policing, basically the police looking more like you and walking the beat and getting to know them. And now we're kind of more in the vibe of more of the mindset of defunding the police. So it does talk about stuff that then became Democratic talking points and didn't really solve a lot of the police problems. And Harris kind of does buy it. He does tote the Democratic Party line on some stuff a little more than we'd like him to.
Yeah. But back to Fred Harris, he does support Humphrey in 1968, even though he's a friend of Bobby Kennedy. And he's kind of on the left wing of the Humphrey campaign. It's like him and Walter Mondale, who are like, we got to be true to our roots, Great Society, New Deal roots. And there's a possibility that he was going to get selected for vice president, Fred Harris. But he's almost takes himself out of the running because he doesn't, he feels it's like a conflict of interest. But Humphrey says no, stay on the short list. He's down to one of the final four people, and then it really comes down to him and Muskie, who Humphrey ultimately goes with because Fred Harris is only 37 at the time. I do wonder if that would have made an impact on the race, to have a young anti-war Oklahoman on the ticket with Humphrey. Do you think that would have tipped the scales?
If he would have let him kind of guide things on Vietnam. The one thing with Muskie is a good choice. Muskie does well. He's tall. He handles some stuff well. The people, again, even want him to run in 72, and then whatever, that doesn't work out for various reasons. But Muskie is considered one of Humphrey's best choices in that summer when he doesn't do anything right. So I don't know if it would have been a big enough impact. But I mean, if he picks Harris and he lets Harris convince him to break with LBJ a month or two earlier, that would matter. I don't know if Harris could have done that, but that's a case, yeah. But Harris was already trying to get him to do that because he's still a voice in the room and he doesn't listen. So I don't know if he would have been more likely to listen if Harris was VP.
Right. And it definitely would have been awkward if he didn't, because Harris at that point is fairly anti-war, relatively speaking. But he maintains, Fred Harris does, that Humphrey was told at the convention that there is a secret plan for peace. And then later on, he is involved in the Salt Lake City speech, which we talked about on the Humphrey episode, where Humphrey finally comes out with a minimal anti-war plank, which is, not what the protesters were calling for, but at least I think a end to the bombing was something. But he says people were wrong to think that Humphrey wouldn't be different from Nixon, and that he still would have been the nominee if RFK had lived. And RFK may have helped him even get elected if he would have helped, unite the Democratic Party, maybe take a better position on Vietnam. He also says Nixon had bipolar disorder, and you could never tell if he's manic or depressed, and that's just going on off the way Nixon would talk. I mean, a lot of psychoanalysis of Nixon from people of this generation who are into politics. But 1969, Fred Harris becomes the chair of the DNC, and he is then interestingly succeeded by a guy, Larry O'Brien, who was a commissioner of the NBA.
I think, yeah. I'm not sure if he's the first commissioner, but he's the first commissioner everyone knows about. The trophy you get when you win the championship is still named after him. And he's the NBA trophy guy, and he's a big player in all these conventions and then the Democratic Party in this time. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, kudos to him. So in 1970, this is a cool thing Harris did in the Senate. He was a major player in the bill that restored land to the inhabitants of the I always screw up this word. Teos Pueblo.
So sorry.
Teos Pueblo, I'm pretty sure is how you say it, which is a area of a mountain land that Teddy Roosevelt took from them and designated as the Carson National Forest in the early 20th century. Because, there was a time when conservatives meant conservation, and there were environmentalist conservatives, and they were also still conservative and believed that you can just take land from indigenous people. And that's what they did with this place. And Harris helped get it back, and he did team up with Nixon to do this as well. But that is something we can point to as a really positive and tangible achievement by Fred Harris. Nixon says at the signing ceremony, "I can't believe I'm signing a bill that was sponsored by Fred Harris."
Just love this. It is, yeah. They're getting some mountain back. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, I think he's in the era when Mount Rushmore, that land was taken and designated as a monument. So it's not the return of Mount Rushmore to the Blackfoot, but yeah, it's almost that type of situation, and that's really nice.
Yeah. It's Taos. God, why couldn't I remember that? I've seen the word many times. I have family in New Mexico. I should know better. But 1972, Harris, as we said, does not run for Senate again. Instead, he aims his eyes upwards at the presidency and wants to run for president. He doesn't last very long, though. He was running for 48 days and then folds. He says in an interview that he didn't think he could get what he wanted to get done in the Senate, and the Kerner Commission made him not want to hold back and just be a senator. And 1972, it seems like a failed campaign, but if you look at the guy who got the nomination, it was George McGovern, who politically is fairly close to Fred Harris. So I think that was probably part of it too. It's like, let's go to my buddy George. So he's kind of retired from politics for a while, and he launches sort of what he wants to become a movement, the New Populism. He promotes economic democracy and is liberal on social issues, desegregation, and he's openly talking about disbanding the CIA, which at this time isn't that fringe of a position to take necessarily, because you have the church hearings where we learned all this terrible illegal stuff that the CIA was doing, and the official story is, oh well, they knocked that off right after that went down, and then H.W. Bush came in and cleaned everything up, but probably not exactly what happened. But he's trying to build a political movement, trying to change the Democratic Party, and so he decides to run again in 1976. He launches in 1975, and there's a columnist, John Lofton, who kind of pans the Harris campaign. He says he's speaking, quote, the new gibberish, and that the coverage of Harris was focusing on his aesthetic, says that he's auditioning to be the new Marlboro Man, and that he talks in editorial cartoons and political pitter-patter. So that's kind of a knock on him, is interestingly not that he's a far-left loon with all these crazy plans, but that he's all image and no substance.
It seems completely wrong to me. He's really not like that. He's not that masculine. Like, he doesn't have that Marlboro Man vibe. He is from, Oklahoma, but he's not like an alpha male type guy, strong, silent type. He even will make a joke later about, like, I must be good on the issues because I'm not good looking. So yeah, he's not running a thirst trap based campaign yet. That he is running on the issues.
Right. He does campaign in a Winnebago. He drives it across the country. It's like a road to the White House thing, but they begin in D.C. and drive it to San Francisco. He's panned by Lofton. One of the things he says is, well, imagine what would happen if he actually wins and drives that Winnebago to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Oh my!
And he says that LaDonna Harris, his wife, like Jackie Kennedy, would do some remodeling. She is quoted, "One of the things Fred and I might like to do is tear down the fence around the White House." And Lofton writes, "This is undoubtedly good news to any remaining members of the Manson family who might be running around loose with .45 automatics."
That's crazy. See, that's the thing is, the president used to be someone you could meet. It used to be you could go to the White House and you could shake the president's hand. This goes up at least until like around Herbert Hoover times. The stock market crashes. I don't think he wants to do it anymore. And FDR begins the modern, more imperial presidency. But yeah, making the president a guy who was like more of a man of the people might have been nice. I think that Winnebago could have fixed us. I wish that Winnebago had pulled in.
Well, it's interesting because the vibes here are kind of what ends up winning this year, which I'll get to in a second. But his campaign is run out of his house in McLean, Virginia. They drive in the Winnebago. He stays in private homes of supporters, and he makes a deal with the supporters that if you let me stay in your house now in August 1975, when I win and I'm in office in 1977, you can come and stay in the White House. And
he give them cards that said it, like, good for one night at the White House. I hope someone still has those cards. There's just something just very beautiful about that.
Right.
Something cute and like oh yeah, I owe you. Yeah, like I'm not gonna forget you. We're gonna be hanging again.
Yeah. There is kind of an embarrassing moment where a school bus of kids, they are driving alongside the camper and they yell to the camper, "Who is Fred Harris?" And this is bad PR, as you noted. But by summer 1975, the campaign has $73,000. The average contribution is $20. I looked it up. $73,000 in 75. In 2024 money, that's $425,000. So not a lot, even by 70s standards. And, you look at the success progressive candidates have had, Bernie is the obvious example.
Yeah.
The internet plays such a huge role in that. It's just the ability to raise that much money and get people to know who you are. And without that, you're really working at a disadvantage.
It gave me fun. It made me feel good about how Bernie he raised an average of $27 from each person, and like how rallying that was.
Right.
But yeah.
And $27 today or 2015, 2016, that's a lot less than $20 in 1975. So, yeah. We're going to say something?
Oh yeah, oh no, that was it. You said you said what I was going to
Okay.
say. I do hope they got to meet him and Bernie. I would assume at some point. I mean, they weren't in the Senate at the same time, but you think they were around at the same time, and they do both have that like they're kind of like a regional version of each other a little bit, and there's something nice about that.
Yeah, I'm sure they met at some point. There's probably some like fighting Bob Fest or something, or maybe the Citizens Party. Although I don't know if Bernie was involved in that. Um, but his campaign is managed by Jim Hightower, who's a really neat guy from Texas, who I think was the agriculture commissioner in Texas for a time, but he's this fast talking Texas guy who his voice sounds very similar to Fred Harris. That's immediately who I thought of when I saw Fred Harris speak, and then I learned, oh, they were friends, and Hightower managed his campaign. But he's another fellow populist, and he makes a joke. Jim Hightower does about Fred Harris. He says, "Our candidate is not just another pretty face, as you can plainly see." So some digs here and there. But at this time, this is the 70s, and Harris is calling for Arthur Burns, the chairman of the Fed, to step down. He says tight money and high interest rates are not good for us. They're only good for bankers. And he has his supporters hold garage sales that are called clean out and clean up garage sales, where they raise money for the campaign so he can clean up American government. So they, sell off their lawnmowers or whatever, clean out their garages, and that helps him run against the fat cats. The issue is privilege is a refrain that he often says. But by July 1975, 61% of Democratic primary voters don't know who he is, but Fred Harris is dead serious that he will be nominated, that he's going to win. And early on, the campaign is kind of dogged by comparisons to George McGovern, who lost really badly just 4 years earlier. And the Harris campaign says, well, no, we're different, right? George McGovern was running a different kind of campaign. He had issue positions like legalized marijuana, talked about UBI, giving everybody $1,000 a month, and that alienated the working class. In our proposals, price controls on oil, steels, automobiles, trust busting, these are all popular sort of working class issues. So that's what they say is just the different candidacy from McGovern. But then when people say he can't win, they go back to, well, people said the same thing about that George McGovern, that he wasn't going to get the nomination, and he did. And this kind of undermines the point that he's not another McGovern, is that he's saying, look what George McGovern did 4 years ago.
Yeah, he's kind of trying to have it both ways. Yeah, and McGovern's still the last Democrat to lose Minnesota.
Right.
Yeah, I think his vibe is very different than McGovern. But yeah, people are always like, well, you lost because you went too far left with McGovern. You got to go to the center. That's what they told Kamala in this most recent election. It's very annoying. But it is a harder case to make right after McGovern had lost. And Carter does have he has the similar Southern twang, but a way of kind of making people feel like he's more in the center, and he's got that evangelical thing going too.
Right. But there are other candidates running who Fred says co-opt his platform. And one of them, I think this is last platform, but as I was saying earlier, the vibes here were definitely sort of the same vibes were deployed by the guy who won, Jimmy Carter. It's another Southerner who is running a very vague kind of feel-good campaign. And he's talking less about specifics than Fred Harris. But he doesn't have a specific tax reform proposal, just talks about tax reform. He says, foreign policy, I want a foreign policy that's as good as the American people. But it's a lot of vagaries. There's also Udall, who's similarly, liberal to progressive, but isn't, as left as Harris. But
Yeah,
as
let me just interject. Yeah,
sure,
I like Harris comes up with a amazing insult that then George Wallace, who's running again, is going to steal. But he says that Jimmy Carter is like a horse trader who will show you his teeth, but not the horses, because you got to see the horse's teeth when you're training for horses. And instead, he would just smile at you. And I bet that's very much more devastating back then, and especially in Oklahoma.
yeah, yeah. So candidates are stealing Harris's insults. They're taking some of his positions and his general vibe, and he just, it seems like he's not getting enough attention, enough airtime, and he's railing against giant corporations, talking about social justice, and even people like Scoop Jackson, who we're going to talk about someday, start using that same rhetoric because they see it works with Fred Harris to an extent. They just ultimately people just don't take him seriously. He has been out of office for 4 years. He's a really funny guy. We have the pretty face joke, and that adds to his charm and makes him able to connect with voters, particularly in Iowa. He is offered Secret Service protection, but this is interesting. He said no. Why did he do that?
I think he wants to just more be like a man of the people. Like he doesn't want the president to be this guy who's up in an ivory tower. And I do like that. But then it kind of was going to backfire. He goes to Chicago. A strange man confronts him with a drawn pistol right after a live TV interview. They're able to kind of convince the guy not to do it. But the guy runs away. The guy's never caught, which is kind of scary. So the guy just like doesn't do it. He goes off and he leads a hopefully normal life. But then right afterwards, they're like, "Oh yeah, we do need Secret Service protection. Yeah, that's we're lucky we got away with that one." And they go to it. Especially if you're saying you're going to get rid of the CIA, you need Secret Service protection, and ideally Secret Service who's not in the hands of the CIA, which is always kind of scary.
Yeah, right. It might be a problem if it was, because he was talking about abolishing the CIA, so they may not have done such a good job. But he's really underestimated going into the Iowa caucus, which before this time, Iowa was not. This is kind of the reason it became a thing, was 1976. Because people didn't really care about it, and I guess there was just more attention at the time of the political media industry was heating up, and they just wanted some action. And then so the first time that you had a state voting, even if it was a caucus, became a big deal all of a sudden.
And Jimmy Carter used it to his advantage. Carter is like, if I win the Iowa caucus, I'll be seen as the favorite. Iowa's a farm place. I'm a peanut farmer. It's going to work. And it leads him to the presidency.
Right. And he hitches his wagon to Iowa, and years before is like meeting people and shaking hands and establishing himself in Iowa and super campaigning in Iowa. And then he wins the Iowa caucus, and people hadn't heard of him before. I mean, maybe more so. He was taken more seriously than Harris. But this makes him a serious contender. Second place is Birch Bayh from Indiana, who's a senator. And then third place is Fred Harris. And this is sadly kind of the highlight of his presidential campaign history. But he shocks a lot of people by coming in third in Iowa. He beats out Udall and Sergeant Shriver. I think it's because it's kind of a populist year. He's offering something different from Nixon, certainly. So his campaign gets some heat from that, but they don't do as well in New Hampshire.
He's trying to diminish expectations, but he is going to run. He is going to run a lot worse in New Hampshire. He finishes. What is he doing in New Hampshire? He finishes fifth in New Hampshire? Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry. Oh no. Oh no, sorry. Wait, he ran second. Sorry. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, sorry. He finishes. Yeah, he's going to finish fourth in New Hampshire. He does try to save it by saying this is for the tittle people. I guess that means the little people, but in an Oklahoma drawl, and that sounds nice. But yeah, he's not. Yeah, he's just not getting high enough in New Hampshire, and Carter is becoming the rural candidate, so that's not good for Harris.
Yeah, and he had jokes after Iowa that he had been winnowed in to the primary, because people say you're winnowed out, but he was winnowed in, and then eventually he is winnowed out, gets fourth place in New Hampshire, and then he's third in Vermont and fifth in Massachusetts, and he does stick it out for another month, but he can't do better than fourth, and so on April 8th, 1976, he bows out and ends his political career. And he says in his speech, what was required, I said, was first to get people's attention, give them a glimpse of what kind of country this could be, a country where a young married couple would not have to worry about how they were going to pay their baby's doctor bills, where an older person would not have to give up lunch or breakfast to be able to buy medicines, where everyone willing and able to work would have a useful job at decent pay, and where our foreign policy, once again, would be based on our ideals so that people would have renewed cause for pride in calling themselves Americans.
Oh, preach. Amen. I wish, yeah. I wish we'd run on that, run on that this year. It's beautiful. Yeah, and yeah, that kind of campaign is missed.
Yeah. So yeah, he retires from politics. He does campaign for Carter in the fall, and he's glad he wins, but will admit later that Jimmy Carter was not a very good president. And he does something few politicians do, which I really respect, which is they move away from the state that elected them. I know Dick Gephardt did this. He's in California now, even though he served Missouri for like decades. And Fred Harris leaves Oklahoma and doesn't go too far to like California or something. But it's almost funnier that he does this. He goes to New Mexico, which is right next door. He is still with LaDonna for another year. Their daughter becomes a Native American activist, and he gets sober and gets really into cross-country skiing. And he is active, until his dying day, I believe, in local politics and things. And he is a chicken farmer, I believe, in Corrales, New Mexico. For a while, he's a professor at the University of New Mexico. He writes some fiction. Did you find out what was it? Short stories or novel?
He mentioned the fiction. I didn't get to see like what the titles were or whatever. But yeah, I would think I think it leans towards like novels about life in that region of the country.
Okay.
But yeah, he's written many books. Yeah, he's definitely a guy he's written way more books than books have been about him, which is a Jimmy Carter thing that Mike Kaplan was telling us about in the Kerry episode. Yeah, he's really a Renaissance man. Yeah, he's like I said, taking up the skiing. The quitting the smoking is amazing. Guys from that generation did. Both my grandpas died much younger than he did because they quit smoking. Like him quitting smoking around 76. That's why he was able to live till 90. Even older. Wait, 90. Oh, he was 94. Yeah. So the quitting the smoking is the reason he has a career very young, because in 76 he's only 46. He retires, but then he has a whole second half of his life, and he has another marriage that goes for 35 years because he was willing to get healthy ahead of the curve. Quit smoking, quit drinking, take up the skiing. Yeah, really something to look up to. I'm about to turn that age, and I need to do stuff like that.
Good advice. Yeah. He does serve on a commission appointed by Obama to improve policing, and they say some things the Kerner Commission said, which is stop militarization of police, body cams, and most of these recommendations aren't really implemented, but they are good suggestions. He does say, though, 50 years after the Kerner Commission, inequality has gotten worse, and America's resegregating. Poverty, he says, is harder to get out of now. We spend less on education than we did back then, and that young black men ask him for jobs and said we need jobs, and that's something they were pointing to back then, and it hasn't really been improved. And as he points out, there's plenty of money to do this stuff.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Is he supports a jobs guarantee as Humphrey did. He very much believes that the people in poverty want to work, and that the government just needs to give them jobs. Yeah, I'll let you keep going with that.
Yeah, that was most of it. He says in 2023 that he supported Joe Biden, and he's a maintainer that he didn't need to drop out, that the age problem was bogus, and he's not a fan of Trump. There is an article in Politico from 2016 after Trump wins where he's interviewed, and he's asked, like, well, you're the godfather of populism. Are you a Trump person? He's like, no, that's not what I was talking about at all. And he is kind of almost a bit of a resist lib here. I mean, that is what he is. He has an email he sends out to his supporters saying that Hillary lost because of Putin, Comey, and the Electoral College. One of those things is definitely true. But I don't know about the
Oh
other
my God, yeah. He's in the room for his last convention. He's in the room probably when Kamala is saying most lethal fighting force. He was at this most recent convention. Right. I wonder what he was saying, and yeah, it is really cool he was still out going to stuff. Now, as far as him not knowing Biden's tool, I mean, Harris is 94 walking around. Maybe he wasn't 100% to know that Joe wasn't 100%, and it is kind of crazy that he's 12 years older than Biden.
Yeah,
who seems incredibly old.
Yeah, but he seemed sharper than Biden in some of those interviews. But yeah, all in all, a fascinating guy. He represents an alternate path, one that looked similar to Jimmy Carter's and the course he set for the Democratic Party in the United States, but on substance was very different. And I think, 1976, Democrats were still spooked about McGovern and repeating that, but Nixon had just done something. He became deeply unpopular by 1976. He had to step down, and his vice president was really had to make up for a lot of lost ground. And Carter wins. So I kind of want to say that Harris might have done it. There was a moment there after Iowa in 1976 where Walter Cronkite predicted that Harris would win.
Oh my God!
At least
the
that
voice of the country,
right? And maybe that's because his literal voice sounded a lot like Fred Harris's, and so there's some bias there. But yeah, he ultimately, a lot of it did come down to, I think, money. Just wasn't able to raise enough even for a candidate back then. But he was talking about things that really resonated with people. And if he became president, let's see, this is late 70s. I think that's really when there's an opportunity to stave off this neoliberal turn. Later than that, it's hard to imagine other people doing it. But that was kind of the last stand, because as we were saying, a lot of those Great Society programs were still persisting into the Carter years. And a big reason they didn't continue is Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, and the thing is, Carter gets power and he prioritizes the energy bill. And Ted Kennedy, we talked about in another episode, wanted to prioritize healthcare, which would have been amazing. We could really use that. I think Harris would have probably prioritized the jobs guarantee and all the stuff that the Kerner Commission came up with. And I think he would have been able to get some stuff passed. I think it was the right time. So he would have at least been able to get some legislation passed. Doesn't mean that all the stuff that happened as the Chamber of Commerce kind of united together and pushed in Reaganism wouldn't have happened, but at least he would have put up a little better of a fight.
Any final thoughts on Fred Harris?
The weak point in his game was definitely the foreign policy. I don't know how strong he was on that. And that definitely would have been an issue in him being president. Actually, it's a good point. I don't know also how much of a world traveler he was. He was very focused on America. I don't know. Yeah, that the foreign policy end of it would have been might have been a problem for him.
Yeah, I look forward to doing an episode on an Anders when there's a failed presidential candidate with my name who's from the U.S. I mean, maybe we could do some of the failed ones from abroad. I'm sure there's plenty in Scandinavia. Well, I am Anders J. Lee. Follow me on social media at Anders Lee here, and follow the pod at Vanquished Pod. It's Vanquished.